Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming out once again. Fourth lecture in the history of philosophy in 16 questions. So last time we talked about ethics, right? How should we live? And part of the question of how we should live, of course, is how do you govern people who are living that way, whatever the way is? And it suffers from precisely the same problem, which is once you ask how people should be governed, there's so many possible answers that it essentially becomes chaos. This is the net result of asking that. But prior to asking the question of how people should be governed, it's important to remember how society was structured. First, very small-scale societies were communal. And they were organized by, hey, we're all in this together and we don't want to die. Think lifeboat, right? You might have a little hierarchy in a lifeboat, but you need everybody to pitch in so you can all survive. Everybody's different skills are manifest, and so you have a place. It's important. You don't do a lot of top-down abusing in this kind of situation because, everybody is valuable in their own way. When you get a little bigger, then you get the problem of how should you make decisions. Historically, the answer to this was the most dangerous person was put in charge, and they got to make the decisions. This is why my favorite story, one of my favorite stories from the Middle Ages is Beowulf. If anybody's familiar with Beowulf. Now, Beowulf was an important person because he was clearly totally insane. When he had to fight the monster, Grendel, everybody else had been slaughtering knights left and right and killing them. So Beowulf shows up and says, you know what? I don't even want to use weapons against Grendel. I'm just going to rip it apart with my bare hands. That'll be fun. And that's exactly the kind of person you want in a society that is ruled by brute force and main violence. Because when you go to battle, you have to. In fact, the earliest cave paintings we have, some of the earliest cave paintings we have, is of a battle. And what you have is you have people with ranged weapons, spears and arrows. And clearly there's two groups and they're sort of faced off against each other. And there's some arrows, just like when you're like in the third grade and you drew it. This is what they did. And it tells a story that A, humans haven't changed that much. Two, that the value there is in the person or people who are willing to sort of run at arrows to chase off the other people. And generally these were battles of demonstration. You weren't trying to kill them. You were just trying to scare them off. Killing people is very dangerous and the risks were too great. So you just wanted to have a show of force. But if you have one crazy person like Beowulf, who will just go, oh, look, they've got arrows. Great, I'm just going to go rip their heads off with my bare hands. He's really great. He's an incredibly valuable asset. And you tend to put him in charge. Now then when you get societies that are a little bigger, this doesn't become that functional. Everybody works out pretty quickly that, yeah, having the most homicidal maniac in charge of your society may not be that productive of a positive outcome. And so you have this struggle that there might be a few seats in the back. Are there any seats left in the back there? Maybe? Yeah, there are a couple around back there. Although we'll get there. Yeah, or maybe grab a chair and bring it in with you. That might be best. Okay, she'll grab some more chairs for you. So when you get a little bigger, you realize that just having the largest, most dangerous person in charge is not that great. And this is the central tension, by the way, in the Iliad. Achilles is the greatest warrior. Nobody questions this. But Agamemnon is in charge. And the question that Achilles asks is, why is Agamemnon in charge when I do all the killing? And Agamemnon says, hey, because the gods love me and because I'm Agamemnon. What he really means is, I'm the head of the bureaucracy. I'm the number one guy in the bureaucracy of the ancient world, and so that's why I'm in charge. He's not a bad fighter, but he's not like even 5th or 6th on the ranking chart. And Achilles gets really, really pissed off about this. And that central struggle is, why shouldn't Achilles lead? Well, because as you had worked out by that time, which is, 800-ish BC, it's really having someone like Achilles run your country is not that great of an idea. It's not clear that having Agamemnon run your country is that great of an idea either, by the way. But Achilles, certainly not. And so you go a little further, and you get a greater sense of humanity, and you go, right, if it's not going to be the strongest person, and it's not going to be the quote-unquote best person, how do you organize people? How do we make this work? And again, it's important to note that people like to live in groups. We're grouper-uppers. We love cities. We have since time immemorial. Even a small city like Chimacum, where we are now, or Port Townsend, in the ancient world would have been considered considerable size. There would have been significant population bases. And so how do you organize these population bases is a real, ongoing, troubling question. And the answer is, believe it or not, given by Rousseau many years later. And he says, every man is born free, and everywhere he's found in chains or shackles, depending on your translation. But he goes on to say, but what you have to do is come up with a social contract that makes the chains worthwhile. That's the deal. He doesn't say you should free people from chains. People always get this wrong about Rousseau. What he's saying is living in groups requires compromise, requires a certain amount of shackling of the individual to the group. And so what you need is a social contract that makes the shackling worthwhile. That makes most of the people, most of the time, go, okay, this is good enough. By the way, no one ever thinks, wow, this is the spectacular best thing ever. See, that's the dream. But historically, it's pretty clear that people are like, yeah, okay, not as bad as it could be. The neighbors have it worse. At least we're not those people. At least we're not French, right? Or whatever this is what the English always say. The English hate the French. French hate, right? So it's whoever the people you don't like, at least you're not them. This has no basis in fact, by the way. It's just this concept that we have. But the important thing to note here is, what is a social contract? What it is it's a story. A nation, any group of people of any size, is ruled by a narrative, by a story, by a tale that we tell each other, our children, adults, and is told repeatedly over and over again. And then you begin to live that narrative. What is a nation? A nation is a fictive thing. If you look at the world from space, you don't see all these lines on the globe. They say, oh, this is where the United States starts. That's where Canada is. Or, oh, Hawaii is part of the United States. See, that would make no sense, right? What's the United States doing way over there? That makes no sense historically. What's going on? Right? But we have this narrative that, oh, the people in Hawaii are somehow very much associated with the people in New York City, which is probably factually inaccurate, right? I think it's just not true. But we have a story that makes it true. This is the key thing. And as long as we love our story enough, not perfectly, but as long as we love our story, we tend to be happy. When our story begins to break down in various ways, we tend to be unhappy. Revolutions, major changes in cultural history tend to happen when various kinds of narratives fail. People talk about military wars and all this. This is sort of vaguely true, but a lot of that is driven by and associated with changing narratives. The entire Reformation, which is probably the most important event in the last 1,500 years in the Western world, or in the last 500 years in the Western world, in the 1500s, was simply a collapse of the notion that the Roman Catholic Church really was the universal church of everything everybody had ever seen. And once that story collapsed, people were like, well, why should the church have, half the land in my area? And everyone was like, we don't know anymore. We used to know. Yesterday we knew. Oh, because it's Roman Catholic Church, rules everything, universal church, all time, all space, all dimension. And then people started going, oh wait, we met some Chinese people and they're not Catholic at all, oddly. And we've been trading with the Moors, and we've been trading the Middle East, and we went around the Cape of Good Horn, and we found the Pacific Ocean, and that wasn't Catholic at all. And all of a sudden people went, there you go. So why should we give half our land to them or allow them to have, all of a sudden the narrative just collapses. But what happens is then people get really, really unhappy. So one part of this is the question of narrative, which we're going to return to. What are the stories that we tell to decide how we should govern people? The other part of it is your narrative has a sort of direction. They call it teleology is the fancy word for it, but it just means it's going someplace. There's an end point that you're going to arrive at in your narrative. And that is the goal of your society. So your societies generally aren't described as these stagnant entities that just exist for all time, unchanged, eternally. Sometimes that happens. Catholic Church tried to pull that off, by the way. But that's generally not the narrative. It's like, we're going to form. Here, my first example, we the people are going to form a more perfect union. That's what we're here to do. We're going to form a more perfect union to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to posterity, and do ordain and establish the Constitution of the United States of America. We've all heard this is the preamble, of course, to the Constitution. There's our story. What are we here for? To establish justice, domestic tranquility, common defense, the benefits of liberty to us and all posterity. Right? When people talk about manifest destiny or white man's burden, this is the part of the narrative. We are bestowing gifts upon the rest of the world, whether they want them or not. Right? It's one of those. Can we give this gift back? That's the narrative that we're moving through history towards this end goal of perfect justice, perfect tranquility, perfect peace, perfect welfare, perfect embodiment of the ideas of liberty. Of course, the tricky part about this is these are often mutually contradictory and they're really complicated to work out. But as long as you're going with this, as long as you have a fundamental belief that, generally speaking, this is a good idea, then your narrative holds up. So I want to give you a couple comparison ones here from different, two that are very similar to ours, the Rights of Man from France and the founding law of Germany, Grundgesetz, that will give you slightly different takes, but both are documents influenced by the Enlightenment. And so in the Rights of Man, you get a little bit of difference. It says, men are born and remain free and equal in rights. Social distinctions can be founded only on the common good. Now we don't have that line in R because what's happening is we didn't really have a domestic nobility in the United States when the Constitution was formed. The domestic nobility was over in England. So when we got rid of the king, we got rid of all of that. In France, they very much had it. And so one of the first things they wrote down is none of this nonsense about nobles. Let's get rid of that. So that's very powerful in their theory of who they are. Also the nation thing. The principle of sovereignty resides essentially in the nation. Now France, of course, if you look at them geopolitically, are in the middle of Europe. And nation-states are just being created, by the way. They're a newish thing. They've been around for a while, but not a long time. And so they really had to emphasize, look, we are a nation. That's where everything comes from being, what the hell is a nation? Again, it's just a made-up concept. And so what they're saying is the foundation of all of this is a made-up concept. This is what people always complain about our money being fiat money, right? Which means it's not backed by anything. And they say, well, yeah, but our whole country is not backed by anything. Our whole country is backed by a belief in the fact that our country exists, just as our money is backed by the idea that our money exists. If people don't believe that the United States exists, it really doesn't exist, it turns out. In large numbers, of course. It's a social construct. Social construct's incredibly powerful, but not to be confused with something that really exists. And so France is saying nations, these things that just have sort of been evolving over the last 100 or so years, are really where everything is at, and we're one of them. And you can tell because we wrote it down in our document here. Like they say, we the people of the United States of America. Who? Where? So the United States of America does not exist when they said, we the people of the United States of America. You just write it down and don't look back. That's the key. Never look back. We wrote it down and we're good to go, right? Now Germany, later, this is a later constitution, written at the end of World War II, when they had a few issues they were trying to straighten out. And they said, equality before the law. All persons shall be equal before the law. Men and women, by the way, shall have equal rights. The state shall promote the actual implementation of equal rights for women and men and take steps to eliminate disadvantage that now exists. Notice this requires the state to actively intervene. It can't just say, well, that's the way things are. No, it has to make it good. No person shall be favored or disfavored because of sex, parentage, race, language, homeland, and origin, faith, or religious or political opinions. No person shall be disfavored because of disability. Now, this seems shockingly modern because it's the first constitution written after the horrors of World War II, when they made a list of horrors they did not wish to see repeated, and then they wrote them in the document and required the state to prevent that. And right now people may know Germany is struggling with the influx of refugees. If you read this, you understand why they're struggling, because it says right in there you can't discriminate against them. But culturally, they really want to discriminate against them. It's a built-in tension between the notion of being opening and welcome and wanting to incorporate people in your society, and a sense of specialness and separateness and not wanting to have to encounter all the foreignness. It's very strong. You may be familiar with this from your own country, right? This is much stronger there, and it's in that conflict that they're living in is written right into the document because it says you cannot do this because it has a painful history. But those are three clearly related notions that come out of the Enlightenment. A story that we tell about how countries are supposed to be formed and what they're supposed to be formed for. They're supposed to be formed to secure individual rights, to help people be equal. Now, if you go back through history and read the laws of Hammurabi, read biblical texts, ancient other texts, you don't run into this concept. Beowulf didn't say, hey, I think we're all equal here. Let's take a vote and see what we should do next. He said, excuse me, please get out of my way. I'm about to kill things. And if you're in front of me, I'll kill you too. Right? It's that very direct use of force. But the problem is, this is what the outcome of several thousand years of evolution. When you have a king, and everything flows from the king, the narrative is very simple, very easy. If you're familiar with Shakespeare, this is all the Shakespearean history plays. The king is good, the king does well, everything is good with the kingdom. And we always think that is hilarious. Like, why would people believe that if the king is good, you're going to get good weather, etc., etc.? But it's the same concept. That was the narrative. We believe in the king. If the king does well and the king prospers, then we'll prosper. If the king is a bastard and he's wrong and he's cheating and doing immoral things, then the country will suffer. The country is the king. The king is the country. That was the story. That was the narrative. And it took a revolution in almost every country that had kings to break that narrative and come up with a new one, many of which were, of course, examples that we're reading here. But it was a very strong notion. The problem that happens, though, is the first time this is sort of broken that we have historical records of in the West is in ancient Greece, of course. And they said, hey, in Athens and some other Greek colonies, they said, let's do a democracy, or let's have a republic. They came up with all kinds of different ways to govern. Let's have an oligarchy. And the problem when you do this is, again, just like with ethics, once you start asking how should you live, there's an infinite number of answers. What is the purpose of your city-state in this case? Is Athens' purpose to make everybody in Athens happy? Is it to be the most powerful city-state in the Peloponnesian area? Is it to fight with Persia endlessly? Is it to make Sparta look bad? Is it to prosper with trade? You know, What is your country supposed to be doing? And when you have a democracy, it turns out what happens is you vote for everything, which is great. They started doing this immediately, which is what Plato and Aristotle are complaining about. Is you vote for war literally on one day, and then the next day they went, oh, that was a bad idea, and then you vote for peace. And you send a ship out to get the people who are going out to make war with a note saying, no, we meant peace. Let's not go to war. And then like 2 months later you go, nah, we meant war. Let's go to war. And then they go, right. So this kind of, wow, what are we supposed to be doing? And like with ethics, you have this problem of, if your country is just supposed to be making everybody rich, then what happens when everybody doesn't get rich? At what point do people start going, hey, this system does not work for me? Or if your country is to say, let's have everybody maximum individual liberty, if people feel constrained, then, of course, the tension comes from there. Let's be the world's greatest superpower. We'll just be mighty and powerful, and that will be great. By the way, this was our narrative for about 50 years. In 1992, with the fall of the wall in Berlin and the fall of the Soviet Union, that narrative collapsed. One reason we're living in such confused times is we have no idea what our narrative is. We used to know it was to be better than the Soviets. They have 10 missiles, we'll have 20. They have 10 orchestras, we'll have 20. They put a satellite in space, we'll go to the moon. By the way, there's no good reason to go to the moon. But the Soviets were in orbit, so they beat us to that. So we had to beat them to something, and the moon is like the next thing. And the Soviets, of course, immediately started to plan to go to Mars. Because that was the next thing. And if they had gone to Mars, we'd be like, right, we're going to Saturn. Screw this. We're just going to blow all the way through. Because our narrative was, our system is good, and we know we're good, because look at the Russians. The Soviets are so bad. So we felt good about ourselves, and we knew why we did things, no matter what the problems were. We thought we knew what was going on. Well, that narrative collapsed, and now we're very confused. What is our country supposed to be doing? Is it supposed to be making everybody healthy? Is it supposed to be remaining world superpower? Are we supposed to intervene all over the place or intervene nowhere? Maybe we should work on the environment. That would be good. Education, how about that? Right? We just don't know. We have no priorities. We're confused. Because a big part of our underwriting narrative just collapsed. And the first collapse, again, took place in ancient Greece. And so what happens is people say, why is ancient Greece so important philosophically? Why does it always come up? Well, one reason is because, again, once you have all these different political systems begin to show up, all of the problems of all the different political systems begin to show up. And so if you want to know anything about political history, you can learn it all from reading the Greeks, because they had every system, and they all failed in different ways. And they all talked about all of them and complained about all of them. So Greece was a direct democracy, an indirect democracy, a republic, an oligarchy, a tyranny in about 150 years. Just rolled right through them. And then back to a democracy, and then they got invaded, and so then they were a satellite nation. Rome was, of course, a quasi-republic, and then sort of vaguely republican, and then really just an oligarchy, and then it was an empire. Straight tyranny. All in about, 400 years. They just clicked right through it. And so all the people who were watching this were like, oh, this is no good. And people, by the way, no matter what you had, people stood around saying, oh, this is no good. When Athens was a democracy, that's when Socrates was saying bad things, and particularly Plato, no use for democracy whatsoever. Aristotle, not much more. While they were a democracy. Then when they were an oligarchy, everybody complained about them being an oligarchy. Of course, everyone complained about tyrants. Nobody liked tyrants except for tyrants, who kept arguing that being a tyrant is great. Right? And so, what should you do? What should be the best thing? What is the best story to tell ourselves about how we should organize ourselves as a people? Different stories, different systems, different ways of living. And the third element here, so you have the narrative, 2, you have the goal, and then 3, both of those things require people. So you have to have a theory of the citizen. Who gets to be a citizen? What is the nature of a citizen? What are the responsibilities of a citizen? How do you tell if someone's a good citizen or a bad citizen? And those change radically. So you can have a democracy like in ancient Athens, very direct democracy. By the way, I still love this idea. I wish we would do it, where major offices were filled by lot. That is so great. It's like a lottery. Imagine this show on TV. The ratings would be off the charts. Everybody would have their number, and you would sit down and you'd watch TV, and then your number would come up, and you'd go, "Congratulations, you're Secretary of State." And you're like, "Boom, Secretary of State. I better get a map." That's sort of, it'd be just like, wow. People would be so excited. Think of the investment we would make in education. Because you'd have to look around and go, "Oh my God, anybody in this entire area could be the next Secretary of State," right? So they had this. What a great idea! I love that idea. I think it would just be chaos, but it'd be great. But it's a whole different way of looking at it. Why could they do this? Well, they could do this because they didn't let almost anyone be a citizen. A very restricted franchise. Relative to anything in the ancient world, wildly liberal franchise. But relative to anything we would consider it, unbelievably narrow. You had to be a citizen, basically means you got born there. You had to be male, of course, because women, you had to be relatively well off. And so this meant that only about, estimates vary, but let's say 15% of the population at any given time was actually able to participate. And that's actually a wild exaggeration, because to participate you had to be there in person. And while we always think of Athens as the city, it's actually a lot of the surrounding agricultural land. And so even many of the citizens who theoretically qualified to participate are out working their farms because they have to. And so active participant numbers were probably in the low thousands. And this is in an area that has a population of 150-ish thousand, say, give or take. The area, not the city itself, but the population from which they're drawing. And so you're talking about a franchise at the tiny percentage of the population. And so they felt a little more comfortable. But even then people thought this was crazy. And of course now we would be all in favor of this, maybe, right? We can see where this would be troubling. So you have the notion of who gets to be a citizen. Should it be rich people? See, an oligarchy basically is a city-state or a nation with 50 citizens. And the qualification for being a citizen is to be really rich and powerful. There you go. And then republics tend to be refined versions of oligarchies, where you go, all right, 50 is not enough, we're going to have 5,000 or 50,000. And then various forms of direct democracy. By the way, we have the initiative system in Washington State. Many states in the United States do, which means anything we want to vote for gets on the ballot. There's a process. But once it's on the ballot, it's a straight up or down vote by the citizens. This is direct democracy. And so sometimes crazy stuff passes, which is always great, because it lets you know that people like direct democracy, but what they actually end up voting for is often surprising and gives you sometimes a better sense of the people. Sometimes a worse sense, by the way, because typically what happened is we vote for tax cuts and for services. These are our two things we vote for. We want better education and less taxes, more roads and less taxes, more environmental policies and less taxes, and so it's this because we want everything, which is great. You've got to appreciate people that way. And so how do you square that is always a problem for governing. But if you don't have a theory of the citizen, you can't have a theory of how to put a country together. What do people really want? What do they really need? Governments always have to ask, what do people really need? Rome here is a beautiful example because Rome worked out that what people want is cheap food and entertainment. And as long as they delivered bread and circuses, Rome, the city, seemed to be pretty happy. Every time you had a riot in Rome, every time you had significant civil unrest in Rome, it tended to be because bread prices skyrocketed, which meant that the average person was afraid of starving or going hungry, which is a reason to riot, right? And so they should feed the people, give them some entertainment, then you don't have to worry about things. Everything is okay. But if that doesn't get taken care of, ooh. Again, think of the collapse of the Soviet Union, the example I just gave. It's pretty clear that the Soviet Union didn't collapse because of gulags. That would be nice if that was the reason. Or torturing people, or sending people to work camps, or arbitrary arrest, or totally and completely inefficient legal system, unbelievable levels of corruption in the government. No, it turns out they couldn't make color TVs. And when other people get color TVs and you don't, apparently that is enough for you to just go, fine, right, done with this political system. By the way, this is only a slight exaggeration. The inability of the Soviet Union to deliver basic consumer goods to a population who saw other people around them getting those consumer goods just undermined completely the sense of worth and of efficacy of the Soviet system. So much so that one thing that hastened the fall of Eastern Europe in particular was they were borrowing huge sums of money from the West. So Germany was loaning vast sums of money to East Germany so that East Germany could buy consumer goods to keep the population happy. And of course this is unsustainable because East Germany had nothing to sell. And so the debt grew and grew and grew until one day they're like, okay, fine, we have to cut off the imports, we have to lower food subsidies because we don't have any money anymore. And we have this huge debt. Boom, there it went. That was it. All over Eastern Europe. This happened repeatedly. It undermined the basic story of the Soviet Union, which was workers' paradise, we deliver the goods for you. Your life will be better today, better tomorrow, better in the future. And then pretty soon it was not getting better, and then it was getting worse. But worse relative only to surrounding countries. I mean, ups and downs, of course, every economy has that, but it was really the surrounding countries doing so much better that hastened the final demise of that system. Which is curious. It's the narrative broke down. Different narrative than ours, but again, once it breaks down, chaos. Another example here, by the way, is this is a Chinese, this preamble to the Chinese Constitution. Totally different. China is one of the countries with the longest histories in the world. By the way, the next lecture, which is on China, is called Why Was the Past So Great? China is one of the countries with the longest history in the world. The people of all nationalities in China have jointly created a splendid culture and have a glorious revolutionary tradition. Feudal China was gradually reduced after 1840 to semi-colonial and semi-feudal country. The Chinese people waged wave upon wave of heroic struggles for national independence and liberation and for democracy and freedom. Great and earth-shaking historical changes have taken place in China in the 20th century. The Revolution of 1911, led by Dr. Sun Yat-sen, abolished the feudal monarchy and gave birth to the Republic of China. But the Chinese people had yet to fulfill their historical task of overthrowing imperialism and feudalism. So notice, our preamble has nothing about the past. There's nothing. It doesn't start, in the beginning we came here and the Indians had some stuff and we took it. And then we moved west and took some more stuff. And then we had a revolution, we kicked out English people who weren't here. What? Yeah, so we don't start there because it's really confusing. China starts with its history. The narrative of Chinese political structures is one of history and the development of historical forces. In a way, we just don't have it at all. It's not abstract rights of people. It's heroic waves of the Chinese population building a better future, freeing us from feudalism and imperialism, which is actually historically pretty much accurate. But the Chinese, after waging hard, protracted, tortuous struggles, armed and otherwise, the Chinese people of all nationalities, led by the Communist Party of China, with Chairman Mao Zedong as its leader, ultimately in 1949 overthrew the rule of imperialism, feudalism, and bureaucratic capitalism, won the great victory of the new democratic revolution, and founded the People's Republic of China. Thereupon, the Chinese people took state power in their own hands and became masters of the country. You, Chinese citizen, are part of a historical narrative. Everything the country does, you do. Everything the country achieves, you achieve. It's the struggles of you and your ancestors that have made us great, and it's that struggle going forward that will continue to make us great. It's not abstract. Later on, it gets to certain rights and all that, but the narrative it lays down is not one of rights and benefits. It's literally a clear story that we're historical actors in the drama of Chinese history. That's how to understand us. So when China launched its first aircraft carrier, there was a wave of enthusiasm all over China because everybody felt like they had contributed to achieving this. We do military stuff all the time, and we pay no attention to it. We don't feel invested, as far as I can tell as a country, we don't feel vested in any way. We don't go, yay, we invaded Afghanistan. Yay, we're in Iraq. Yay, we have military bases in Germany still, for some reason. It's like, oh, the military is out there. We know we have the military. We might complain about spending too much on the military. We might even not like what the military does. But as far as I can tell, most Americans have no direct attachment to it. They don't feel like the military is them and they're part of the military. It's not our story. It's very different historically, by the way. It's a different political environment again. Very challenging. So you have to have a theory of people, you have to have a narrative, and you have to have a goal. And when any of those things go awry, then your ability to govern goes seriously awry. And you get transitional periods where people have to come up with a new story, a new narrative. And we hate this, by the way. We really, really like to hang on to our old stories. So think about this notion of tradition. Tradition is the keeping of the old stories alive because it gives you a sense of order and coherence and continuity. And human civilization requires order, coherence, and continuity. It doesn't exist without it. And so we're heavily, heavily vested in things continuing more or less, give or take, the same way they have been, at least in the ways that we think are most important. So think about all of the technological changes that have happened in the last 40 years. I mean, a true world-shattering, unbelievable technological evolution. Cell phones, satellites, telecommunications of all kinds, medical evolution, genetic. I mean, wow. Doesn't bother us, generally speaking. I mean, there's problems here or there. People, are they watching us? What are the ethics of genetics? Should you be modifying the genome of unborn babies? Sure, we have questions, but none of them feel seriously undermining because they don't touch any of our core narratives. Our core narratives don't talk about technology. If we were a xenophobic or technologically averse society, this stuff would be driving us mad, by the way. This is one of the problems the Middle East is facing. Very leery of technology because they're built on strong core traditions that are suspicious of it. And so any influx of technology, there's a lot of resistance, cultural tension creates all these problems, very vexing. And we're just like, man, that's fine. Anything that has to do with economic prosperity, now we're getting touchy. Because we expect a great deal of economic prosperity, in theory. Right? We like the notion of that very powerfully. And so this is why if you want to know what the government spend all their time worrying about at the city, county, state, national level, it's taxes, spending. How's the economy doing? I mean, this is what they spend probably 80% of their time worrying about because they know any sort of economic destabilization or unease will bother us probably more than anything else. Because our narrative is about that. We're going to go west, and you can grow. You can get free land. You can prosper. You're going to go further west, that's endless. You can go to college. Everybody can go to college. Your children can have opportunities that were never dreamed of by your parents. They can learn. They can prosper. Every generation will do better than the generation before. We know all this stuff because it's the stories that we've been told in the United States for generations. Why are we better than the Soviet Union? Really big color TVs. I actually just think this is why TVs keep getting bigger, inexplicably, is because we know that's good. Because we're really showing the Soviets now, because they're like 80 inches, right? I mean, that's just amazing how big they've gotten. Pointlessly, but amazingly. But because that's where we go. That shows that we're prosperous. We know we're prosperous. We know we're doing better. Until we get the suspicion that we're not. And once you get the suspicion that you're not, people get really pissed off. And weird shit starts to happen. You may have noticed this. And people go, oh, what's going on? What's going on? Well, one of our narratives has collapsed. We're not fighting the Soviet Union anymore. Second thing, the promise of future prosperity for a large part of our population, regionally organized, has fallen apart. And they aren't imagining it, by the way. It's not like they woke up one morning and were living in houses of gold and discovered that they were houses of gold. No, they're like, wait, we're not doing better than our parents. We're not even doing better than we were 10 years ago. What the hell is going on? This was not what I was promised. And so that notion that those narratives start to collapse and start to work. Like I said, this is what happens. Societies have weird things happen to them. And everyone goes, oh, nobody could see this coming. You can never tell what's going to happen, by the way. But I can guarantee you, anytime narratives start to fail, really strange things. I mean, history is perfectly clear on this. People all of a sudden just start to get leery. They don't know what to do. They're in a void. They want a new narrative. This is why kings were always crowned by, religious authorities. Ordained by God to rule on earth. This is, by the way, not a Christian idea at all. It goes way, way, way back. Ordained by God to rule on earth so that you're not just in a cycle of earthly things, you're in the whole cycle of the heavens. Your life, your afterlife, your pre-life is all explained by your political system. You're participating in a narrative that takes the whole universe into account. And so you're happy-ish. Right? That's the thing. Happy-ish. Maybe not perfect. Things go wrong, but you have a story and you're sticking with it. And then when somebody comes along and says, we don't believe in your story, again, this pisses people off. And they will fight you. But if they start to disbelieve in their story, they freak out. This is, like I said, couldn't be any clearer in history. So when you ask the question of how should we govern, you have to remember that's really three closely interrelated ideas, all of which have to be worked out simultaneously. What kind of people are we governing? What do they want? Who are they? How should they live? What do we expect from them? What do they expect from their government? 2, what is our goal? Is it prosperity? Is it military might? Is it looking really impressive? Right? Why people? If you've noticed this over the last couple of years, the Olympics are starting to only take place in dictatorships, and the World Cup seems to be going the same direction. Oligarchies and dictatorships, because it turns out that democracies have worked out that it's too expensive. They don't care. They're not that interested in getting the sort of impressive, big gold ribbon that says we held the Olympics. Right? In America, we don't care if we hold the Olympics. We're like, okay, that's great, yay. But in other countries, it's like, whoa, we must be strong, we must be powerful, we must be great because we hold the Olympics, which is to say, we bribed a bunch of Olympic officials and paid a lot of money to hold the Olympics. Right? And that, because it's really valuable in certain countries for their narrative to do things like hold Olympics. Other countries just don't care. A great example is if you look at a country like, say, I'm trying to think of a small country where this would be the case. Well, a lot of small countries, by the way, Central American countries all over the place, we tend to look down on them, of course, because they're small Central American countries or South American countries. But if you look at their budgets, they tend to spend a lot of money on like food for the people and education. It tends to be huge percentages of their budget. And we just think that's crazy. Why would you do that? Why would you spend so much money feeding your people? Subsidizing food, subsidized beer. Some countries have subsidized beer, which I think is hilarious. And education, and maybe healthcare, And still, we look at them and go, oh, look, they're still living in poverty, da, da, da. But if you look at a percentage of their budget, it's really a significant investment. Other countries invest a huge amount of money in the arts, like, say, France or Italy. Huge amount, unimaginable quantities of money invested in the arts, proportional to their size. We spend nothing. We don't believe in them. We just don't. We don't care. It's not even clear, by the way, that government should spend money on the arts. That's always that sort of vexed notion. But we really don't want our government to, and we don't care whether they do or not, generally speaking. But a country like France spends billions and billions of dollars. And proportional to the United States, it would be as if they were spending sort of a significant percentage of our military budget was going to art. That makes your country different. I think I'm willing to give it a try as an experiment. But it's a different concept of what you're shooting for. And then finally, you have to ask, what is the narrative we want to tell ourselves about who we are and how the world works and how we all live together in a community? And that is how you build some sense of local, city, county, regional, state, and national identities, which overlap, but of course are not identical, is to integrate some sense of that so that everybody can get along and feel moderately okay about what's happening. And I would argue, in conclusion, that the question is really the question should be asked now, because I think our narrative is sort of in trouble. It's wobbly. And we're going to have to come up with some new answers before we're going to be able to address some of the wobbliness that I think we're all feeling. So thank you very much. How should we govern?